At this time, I'm going to hopefully tell you a little bit about what's on my mind today. Um, this is a little bit longer than normal, but I can't do it shorter because of the nature of the Torah reading, which is kind of gross, as you probably heard. It's all about bodily fluids coming out and how you're supposed to be clean and not clean. And again, it's when we say pure and not pure, we're never talking about the it's not a judgment. It doesn't mean you're good or bad. It's clean or not pure spiritually. All right. So it has nothing at all to do with anything like that. So just so you'll know. All right. So let me begin. At the Toms River Post Office the other day, a woman was complaining to the clerk that back when they delivered mail via Pony Express, a writer could get a letter from New Jersey to Boston in 2 days. And she says, 2 days by horse. Now it takes 3 days to go to Boston. So she wanted to know why. And the clerk thought for a second or two, and then his face obviously lit up because he knew an answer. And he says, well, ma'am, those horses are a lot older now. So we're going to get back to that in a little while. Anyway, today I'm going to talk about a subject that I fully admit, I know nothing at all about. And I know that you're thinking that I do that every Shabbos, but this time, even I know nothing about this subject. So, and I also know I never will. So why? Why don't I know it? Because I'm going to talk about what the Torah addresses, the spiritual significance of mothering. I will never be a mother, never have been, never can be. The spiritual experience of having one's first menstrual period. I think you'll agree that that's not going to be possible either. First of all, I'm way too old for that. But second of all, it can't happen for me anyway. And the spiritual experience of giving birth. So now you know why I say I will never know anything about those things. I just can't. Anyway, I did have a hint because my daughter Rachel, my youngest daughter, had a sign on the mirror in her bedroom, and it said, I have PMS and a gun. Do you have anything to say? I knew when it was that time I didn't go in her room at all. Anyway, I can't really understand what the women go through with that. I can only watch and feel like it, but I don't know. Anyway, before we get into that, let me share a couple of things with you. It's been decades since the first woman was ordained as a rabbi. Been decades. I know people think, oh, it just happened. No, it's been a long time. And her name was Regina Jonas, and she lived in East Berlin, and she became a rabbi, believe it or not, on December 25th, 1935. 1935, she became a rabbi. And in the United States, the Reform movement ordained its first rabbi in 1972, and the Reconstructionist movement in 1974, and the Conservative movement in 1985. And finally, in 2009, and I remember telling you this when we were in the synagogue in Monroe Township, when we had our shul there, I remember telling you in 2009 that Sarah Hurwitz became the first modern Orthodox woman to receive smicha, modern Orthodox. She was the first one, Sarah Hurwitz. She is now called Rabbah at the Orthodox Hebrew Institute and the president and co-founder of Yeshivat Maharat, both in Riverdale, New York. So now we have women rabbis in the movements. Not the Chabad doesn't do it. Well, none of those groups do it. But you know, you kind of think it's going to happen eventually. Anyway, today, even in Eretz Yisrael, Orthodox institutions are beginning to grant smicha to women today, but their rabbinic roles are limited to teaching. So they're allowed to teach, which is what a rabbi is, my teacher, but that's it. They can't officiate at services yet in the Orthodox movement. But times, they are a-changing, and they are a-changing ever more quickly. But I can't find an argument that can go against the fact. You cannot tell me that women have always been a great help to our spiritual lives of the Jewish people. You can't tell me that they have not been. You just can't. It's been like this forever. And as for women rabbis, it is also clear that they benefit us because they understand Torah in ways that men like me cannot. Because they notice things that men will miss because we're not women and it doesn't affect us. So today I'm going to share a couple of those Torah lessons that we can learn from women rabbis that prove this. This week's Torah reading deals with childbirth and then with the menstrual cycle. And as is obvious, and as I said before, I have never given birth to a baby, nor have I ever had the great pleasure of experiencing a menstrual cycle. So, the Torah lessons that I'm going to share with you today would never have occurred to me, not in a million years. But you know what? Since women rabbis could have experienced all these things, they can understand Torah in ways that we men could never. So the first lesson comes from a conservative rabbi, Rabbi Nina Beth Carden. One day, Rabbi Carden was doing research in a rare book collection in the library of the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. She discovered that in 1786, Judith Cohen, a woman, not a rabbi, just a woman who lived in Italy, received a gift from her husband. And what was it? It was a prayer book. It was 112 pages specifically for women. And it was specifically for use during pregnancy, labor, and childbirth. And then it also had a section of prayers for women to say during nurturing, weaning, and other key moments in a mother's life. A male scholar might have overlooked this siddur, but Rabbi Carden, a wife, a mother, a scholar, and she was deeply interested in what this book had to say about birthing and mothering. So she came across a prayer to be said while breastfeeding, and it grabbed her soul. And she translated it into English and published it so others could learn from it. And here it is, and you might be shocked by this. May it be your will, O Lord our God and God of our ancestors, that you provide for this gentle creature, my baby, plenty of milk, as much as is needed. Give me the disposition and the ability to find the time to nurse this infant with patience until the baby is satisfied. Cause me to sleep lightly enough so that the moment the baby cries, I will hear and respond. Spare me the horror of accidentally laying upon my child and smothering the baby while I sleep, God forbid. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. You know, remember, in those days, they didn't have formulas. They had to do breastfeeding. So people were worried about, did they have enough milk? But the prayer is really very simple. It's very touching and it's very powerful. Make sure I have enough milk, ensure enough patience, that I sleep lightly enough, and that I do not crush my baby in my sleep. So I thank Rabbi Carden for discovering this prayer and sharing it with us, because it is not something a man would ever think about. You know, it's impossible. Then there is the lesson we get from Rabbi Elise Goldstein of Toronto. It deals with what a young woman might say when she has her first period. Somehow our Siddurim neglected to provide a prayer for this fantastic occasion. Of course it did. Why would it? No siddur in the beginning was done by a woman. It was all done by men. And which man would ever have thought to include such a prayer? It's impossible. We don't have that. We don't suffer from that. So did you know that there is a custom that certain Jews in Europe practiced through the ages? I didn't know anything about this, but some of you might. There is a custom, and I don't like it. Personally, I find it to be a terrible custom. But the custom is for a young girl's mother to slap her daughter when she first gets her period. Why? I can't find a good reason for this custom. They slap her in the face every time, or the first time she has her period. Furthermore, I never would have heard about this without Rabbi Elise Goldstein writing that when she got her first period, her mother said, "Welcome to the pain of being a woman," and then slapped her. Well, it turns out the rabbi's mother said she couldn't slap Elise, so instead she kissed her and gave her a little love patch on the tuchus, as she called it. And she did it for tradition's sake. And as she grew older and became a rabbi, she kept looking for an explanation but never found one. Then she began to look for a prayer buried somewhere in our Jewish tradition that might shed light on it, but again, she didn't find one. So she decided to create one. First, she says she thought about saying Shehecheyanu for bringing her to this great occasion. She didn't think that was right. Then she thought about saying Asher Yatzar to thank God for forming the human body. But somehow these prayers didn't work for her because they could be said for so many different things. Then, after much thought, it came to her. She knew that in a traditional siddur, there is a bracha, a blessing that men say in the morning that thanks God, quote, for not making me a woman, unquote. Most women and even some men find this prayer very offensive, so it has been left out of many modern siddurim, including the one we use. It's not there, but it is in the Orthodox siddurim. And Rabbi Goldstein knew this and came up with a different idea. Do you know what she did? Each month when she got her period, she covered her head and said, "Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who has made me a woman." Every time she said these words, Rabbi Elise realized that changing the wording from the negative to the positive reinforced her own sanctity and reminded her that both men and women are created in the divine image. The third example comes from Rabbi Ann Ebersman of Heschel School in New York. Rabbi Ann said that even before she became pregnant, she dreamed of studying Torah with her child. To her surprise, she discovered that her infant wound up teaching her Torah right from birth. Can you imagine? Now, I know many of us here are grandparents, some even are great-grandparents. And I am sure that we all know how every Jewish child is a genius. We all know. I know my grandchildren are, and I know yours are too, because we never miss an opportunity to tell each other what a genius our grandchildren are, how geniuses they are. We all know it. And still, who here can believe that a newborn can teach Torah, even though they're geniuses at birth? Well, amazingly, Rabbi Ebersman had several examples of how her newborn Emma taught her Torah. The first lesson is that infant Emma never wanted anything she didn't need. Never. Unlike most of us adults, This newborn never got confused about the difference between something she wanted and something she needed. She never thought that she needed money to buy new outfits or jewelry or pocketbooks or shoes. She never thought she needed a raise or a new car or a big house or a cruise. She never thought she needed a new smartphone or a tablet, let alone to argue about whether it had to be an iPhone or an Android. No, none of that. She didn't complain. She didn't argue. She didn't want any of that. All she wanted and insisted on, and quite vocally, I am sure, were food, care, and attention. The things she needed to survive. That's it. Beyond those basic needs, Emma always appeared satisfied. When she cried, it was a notification that she was hungry or needed attention. She never cried to manipulate, to threaten, or to demand anything she didn't need. So, what would it be like if we adults lived in such a way that we could properly prioritize our needs and our wants like the Torah tells us to? What if we only kicked and screamed and yelled for the things that we really needed? That is the first lesson of Torah that Rabbi Ann learned from her daughter. The second has to do with when baby Emma started to track. Tracking, they call it. You know what tracking is. That's when your eyes start to follow an object. And it's a very important measure in a child's development. Because when they do it, my grandchild or my child or my Greek is a genius. One day when Emma was in the changing table, she was about a month old, her mother was trying to get her tiny little arms through the sleeves of her stretchy. And for some reason, the rabbi decided to wind up the musical mobile that hung above her table. Suddenly, the most amazing thing happened. At first, when it started to move, Emma got scared and she looked scared and she jumped a little. But then her eyes started to follow the mobile as it went round and round and round. Emma's face lit up with delight and she started to shake with excitement. Emma lay there content and happy for several minutes, watching the mobile go round and round and round with a big smile on her face, cooing with joy. This reminded Rabbi Ebersman of chapter 2, verse 11 of the book of Tehillim, Psalms, where it says that we are supposed to serve our God with awe and tremble with excitement. The rabbi was amazed that this little infant already understood this psalm. At the age of 4 weeks, Emma was a genius. She could experience awe and she trembled with excitement at the wonders of God's world that this mobile represented for her. Yes, even at the age of 4 weeks, Emma understood what many of us who are older, like those horses that don't make it to Boston so fast, supposedly smarter than an infant, we don't take the time to understand anything like this. While we may experience fear in our daily lives, we do not know how to see past that fear like the baby did and find such joy in God's world. Do we get better at taking everything for granted while putting up thicker and thicker walls that keep the joy out? There are only a few lessons we can learn from these three remarkable rabbis. From Rabbi Nina Beth Carden and from her teacher, Judith Cohen, who lived in the 18th century, we learn that there is a tremendous sacred nature to feeling and caring for a precious child. From Rabbi Elise Goldstein, we learned that we must be open to learning new prayers that help us through our deepest spiritual moments. And from Rabbi Ann Ebersman, we learned what an exciting journey mothering is, and how much Torah we can learn even from a person who's 4 weeks old. From infants, we learn. These lessons scratch the surface of all the wonderful teachings women can bring because these are experiences men could never fully know. Now, since I've talked so much about mothering, I must say something about the lessons about fathering. When my wife was in labor, when she was in labor, Lynn, with our daughter Rachel, the doctor finally said, Mazel tov, it's a girl. And before they cleaned the baby, they cut the umbilical cord, they didn't let us do it back then. He cut the umbilical cord and he gave her to me first. That was unusual, to give to the father first. But you know what I said? I was unsuccessfully choking back the tears. But I said, thank you, God, it's a girl. She won't ever have to go through what I just went through. Looking back, it really isn't funny. It really isn't. But you know me, I like to find funny things in everything. But it demonstrates that because of our experiences, there are things men understand better than women, and there are things women understand better than men. And I don't care how much you argue that it's not true, it is true, because we are different. And I thank God for this. I thank God because we're different, but I also thank God for not making me a woman, but not in a negative way. But like those horses that I mentioned when I started, I now thank God, as beautiful as it was, that my wife and I are older so that we will never have to go through that birthing experience ever again. And I want to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and Am Yisroel Chai.